Welcome to Hard Script.
She said it casually, like she was talking about dinner plans. Not angry, not playful, just flat. She told me I wasn't getting anything until she felt like it. We were standing in the kitchen of the condo I bought years before I met her. The place had clean lines, quiet walls, and a mortgage I'd already beaten halfway down on my own. She leaned against the counter scrolling through her phone, already done with the conversation. Her tone wasn't about intimacy. It was leverage. She knew exactly how it landed. I didn't respond. I rinsed my coffee mug, set it in the rack, and walked past her. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. In her mind, this was control, withholding as a reminder of who was in charge of what. She left for work shortly after, dressed sharper than usual for a regular day at the Marriott downtown. New blazer. Heels she usually saved for conferences. She said she had a long one ahead, important meetings with regional leadership. That had become her favorite phrase lately. Important meetings. Regional leadership. Career talk that always ended with her coming home later than planned. Phone face down, energy gone. I worked from the second bedroom, code on one screen, logs on the other. Remote contracts didn't require small talk or excuses. They only cared that things worked. Around midday, I noticed her AirPods case on the entry table. She'd forgotten them again. That almost never happened. Later, while my laptop was open and idle, a soft chime broke the silence. A device connected. Not mine. A voice came through the speakers before I could process what was happening. Male. Older. Comfortable. The kind of voice that never asked, only assumed. He was talking about Orlando first, then Miami. About timelines. About patience. About how she just needed to keep things steady at home a little longer. He laughed when he said it. She laughed too. Not the polite kind. The relaxed one she hadn't used with me in months. I didn't touch the keyboard. I didn't move. The call dropped on its own when the car engine cut. By the time the room went quiet again, I had already closed every open tab in my head. I picked up the AirPods, placed them back exactly where she'd left them, and returned to my work. The code compiled clean on the first run. That evening, she came home late again. She talked about traffic, about stress, about how exhausted she was. She didn't mention Orlando. She didn't mention Miami. She didn't notice that I listened the same way I always had. What she didn't know was that something had already shifted. Not emotionally, structurally. And once that happens, everything else becomes procedural. The next morning, she moved through the apartment like it was a hotel room she'd already checked out of. Shower running, music playing low, the scent of her perfume hanging in the hallway a little too long. She didn't look at me when she grabbed her tote bag. She didn't need to. The routine was doing the work for her. When the door shut, the place went back to the quiet I was used to. I took my laptop to the kitchen island and opened a new contract build. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed with a message from my friend Ryan. He lived 2 floors down and worked security for the building. The kind of guy who saw everything and rarely made a big deal out of it. He asked if I was home. I stepped into the hallway and found him by the elevators, leaning against the wall with a coffee in his hand. He didn't smile. He didn't look curious. He looked careful, like he was choosing words that wouldn't bounce back on him later. He told me he'd seen my wife in the garage the night before. He described the car first, like it was the safest part to say out loud. A dark Audi SUV, clean, expensive, the kind that didn't belong to a rideshare queue. He said the driver never got out, just waited with the engine running. My wife walked up like she'd done it before. Ryan didn't say the word affair. He didn't say the word cheating. He didn't have to. He added one more detail, the kind that stuck because it sounded so ordinary. He said she smiled when she opened the passenger door, not a polite smile, not a tired one, a private one. I thanked him. That was all. I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask how often. I didn't ask what time. I didn't need extra footage of something I'd already heard. Back inside, I worked like nothing happened. Around midday, a delivery showed up at the front desk and Ryan texted again, telling me there was a box addressed to her. I walked down and signed for it. It was a Marriott-branded package, corporate clean, heavy paper, printed labels. Inside were conference materials and a name badge in a plastic sleeve. The location was Orlando, a corporate training event. Her name was typed under her title, assistant manager, like she was already practicing what it would look like to be someone else. At the bottom of the itinerary was a list of leadership attendees. One name was highlighted in bold on the welcome page, The kind of formatting meant to impress. Greg Harrison. I didn't react. I put everything back exactly as it was, resealed the box, and carried it upstairs like I was bringing her a gift. When she came home, she asked if anything arrived for her. I told her it had. I watched her face change when she saw the package, then smooth itself back into calm. She carried it into the bedroom and shut the door. The click of the latch sounded final, like a decision made without me. I went back to my desk, opened my calendar, and created a new appointment with one line of text. Real estate attorney. Consultation. After the consultation was scheduled, I didn't rush anything. I let the apartment keep its rhythm. Mornings stayed quiet. Evenings stayed polite. She moved through the rooms like someone rehearsing for a different life, always half-dressed for somewhere else, always checking her phone before she checked on me. A few days later, she left early again. She said it was another long stretch with leadership, said it the same way she always did, like repetition made it true. When the door closed, I opened the shared cloud account we'd set up for bills. I hadn't touched it in months. There was no need. Everything had always cleared on time. The pattern was easy to spot once I stopped looking away. Ride charges that didn't match her schedule. Flights booked under corporate codes but upgraded with personal cards. Restaurants near airports, not downtown Austin. Nothing reckless. Everything neat. Controlled. Like someone who believed the outcome was guaranteed. I didn't screenshot anything. I didn't forward files. I didn't build a case out of anger. I just noted what was there and closed the account again. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed on the counter while she was in the shower. The screen lit up with a notification preview, just long enough to register tone without context. A name I recognized now. A message that assumed familiarity, patience, secrecy. It vanished before I touched the device. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, she noticed the phone exactly where she'd left it. She always did. She smiled at me like nothing existed outside the room, like the future was already decided. That night, she mentioned Orlando again. Talked about how intense the training would be, how competitive things were getting, how sacrifices were necessary. She spoke like someone already justifying absence. I nodded once and went back to my screen. The next morning, she packed a carry-on with more care than usual. I watched from the doorway as she folded clothes she'd never worn for me. When she left, the apartment felt lighter, not emptier, like space had been reclaimed. While she was gone, I met with the attorney. He reviewed the deed, the purchase date, the occupancy terms. He didn't raise his voice or ask dramatic questions. He explained the process the same way I explain systems to clients. Inputs, outputs, boundaries. When I got home, I printed nothing. I signed nothing yet. I just placed the folder in my desk drawer and locked it. That evening, she sent a photo from a hotel mirror. New city, new energy. She said she missed me. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked through the apartment, room by room, noting what was mine and what wasn't. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt precise. Whatever she thought she was building elsewhere, it wasn't connected to this place. And soon, she wouldn't be either. She came back from Orlando carrying confidence like a new accessory. Her voice sounded lighter, her steps sharper. She talked about meetings that ran long and dinners that were mandatory, about how leadership noticed people who stayed flexible. She didn't say his name. She didn't need to. The way she said Miami told me everything. 2 evenings later, she stood in the bedroom doorway while I was closing my laptop. She said she was exhausted, said work had taken everything out of her. Then she said it again, the line she'd already practiced in her head. She told me I wasn't getting anything until she felt like it. No anger. No argument. Just a reminder of terms she believed she controlled. I looked at her long enough for the silence to stretch. Then I nodded once and went to the living room. I didn't follow. I didn't sleep on the couch. I slept exactly where I always did. The next morning, she left early again. I waited until the door shut before opening my desk drawer. The folder was still there, clean and untouched. I drove downtown and met the attorney one more time. He finalized the notice without drama. 30 days. Legal minimum. Clear language. No room for interpretation. When I got home, I placed the envelope on the kitchen counter where she couldn't miss it. I didn't text her. I didn't warn her. She found it that evening. I was in the second bedroom, headphones on, when her footsteps stopped abruptly. She stood there for a while before speaking. Her voice sounded confused, then irritated, then thin. She asked what this was supposed to mean. I told her she had 30 days to move out. She laughed once, short and sharp, like she thought it was a tactic. She said she paid rent. She said this was our place. She said she needed time. I told her she had 28 days left. I told her rent wasn't required anymore because she wasn't a tenant. She was a guest, and I was done hosting. The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. Her face emptied out in stages, like something powering down. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She stood there recalculating. Over the next week, she tried to regain footing. She cooked meals she never had time for before. She asked questions that didn't go anywhere. She acted like nothing was happening, like normal would reassert itself if she held it long enough. I stopped staying late. I stopped filling space. I started packing my own things into boxes I didn't need to label. She watched me quietly, like she was waiting for the moment I'd blink. I didn't. On the 10th day, she asked where I was going. I told her I'd already left. Once the notice existed, the apartment stopped being neutral territory. She began moving through it like someone trying not to disturb evidence. Drawers opened carefully. Closets checked twice. Her phone never left her hand. She started taking calls on the balcony. Not whispering, not hiding, just angled away enough to pretend it wasn't deliberate. I never followed. I didn't need to hear names anymore. The tone was enough. Short sentences. Pauses that waited for reassurance. A voice trying to stay valuable. I kept my schedule unchanged. Morning work. Afternoon calls. Evenings quiet. The difference was that I no longer adjusted around her. If I cooked for myself. If I left, I didn't explain. Space stopped being shared and became segmented. A few days later, she didn't come home at all. No message. No excuse. I slept without checking my phone. The next afternoon, she returned with tension pulled tight across her shoulders. She said there were complications. She said things at work were shifting. She said leadership was reevaluating timelines. Miami wasn't mentioned, but it hovered in every sentence. That night, her phone rang again on the balcony. She stayed out longer this time. When she came back inside, her confidence was gone. Whatever she'd been promised now had conditions attached. Distance, discretion, time. I didn't ask. I didn't react. I finished what I was doing and went to bed. The following morning, I received an email from the attorney confirming the delivery receipt for the notice. Everything was documented. Everything clean. She tried again that evening. This time with concern instead of control. She asked where I'd been sleeping. She asked if I was serious. She asked if we could talk. Her voice wasn't sharp anymore. It was searching. I told her the timeline hadn't changed. She sat down at the kitchen table like the chair had suddenly gotten heavier. She said she'd paid her share. She said she'd invested time. She said she'd built a life here. I let the silence answer. Over the next week, the pattern repeated. She left earlier, came back later, started packing small items into bags she kept in her trunk. She checked listings on her phone and cleared them when she noticed me nearby. She tried to act unaffected, but the tension leaked through. One evening, she mentioned staying with a friend if things got too uncomfortable. She said it casually, like she was testing how replaceable this place was. I didn't stop her. The apartment stayed calm. The walls didn't absorb panic. They reflected clarity. Whatever leverage she thought she had left was dissolving somewhere outside these rooms. And for the first time since I'd known her, she wasn't moving towards something better. She was reacting. By the end of the second week, she wasn't negotiating anymore. She was preparing to land. The first real crack showed up outside the apartment. It happened quietly, the way status always shifts before people admit it. Her phone started lighting up less. Group chats went silent. Invitations stopped coming with urgency and started arriving with conditions attached. She spent longer staring at screens before responding, rereading messages that used to be automatic. One evening, she came home earlier than usual. Not relaxed, not confident, just early. She mentioned a dinner with coworkers that had ended awkwardly. Said someone had asked a question that didn't quite land right. Said the room had gone still for a moment longer than it should have. She didn't say what the question was. A day later, she dressed carefully for a family gathering she couldn't avoid. I watched her from the hallway as she adjusted her hair, changed tops twice, checked her phone again. She asked if I was coming. I told her I had work. She left without pressing. When she returned that night, she moved slower. Her bag dropped by the door instead of going where it belonged. She said her sister had asked why I hadn't been around lately. She said her mother had noticed I wasn't mentioned anymore. She said people were starting to ask if everything was okay. I didn't answer. The following week, one of her coworkers stopped acknowledging her the way they used to. No warmth. No side conversations. Just professional distance. She tried to laugh it off when she told me about it, but the sound didn't hold. Whatever narrative she'd been selling was starting to thin. I stayed out of it. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't clarify. I didn't defend. Silence did more than explanation ever could. Midweek, she came home visibly shaken. She said a rumor was circulating. She said someone had implied she'd overplayed her hand. She said leadership was pulling back, keeping things formal. Greg's name came up for the first time, not spoken directly, but present in the pauses between words. That night, she didn't go to the balcony to take her calls. She stayed inside, pacing, phone in hand, waiting for it to ring. It didn't. I watched from the edge of the room as realization crept in. Not about me. About herself. About how quickly influence disappears when it's not backed by stability. Later, she tried to talk again. Not about us. About pressure. About how unfair things felt. About how people were misreading her. I let the room stay quiet. By the end of the week, she wasn't being included in plans anymore. She wasn't being consulted. She wasn't being reassured. The circle she thought she'd climbed into was closing ranks without her. And for the first time, the loss wasn't private. It was visible. Not because anyone accused her of anything, but because no one reached out to catch her when she started to slip. By the third week, the apartment felt different to her. Not hostile, not cold, just indifferent. She started waking up earlier than necessary, moving quietly like sound itself might cost her something. She kept her belongings consolidated now, clustered instead of spread out. The confidence she'd brought back from Orlando had been replaced with calculation. Every move looked like it was being measured against an invisible deadline. She tried to stay busy. Gym sessions she never used to attend. Late errands that didn't require being late. Calls taken in her car instead of the balcony. The walls had stopped feeling safe to her. I was still there, but I wasn't available. I existed in the same space without sharing it. If she spoke, I listened without engaging. If she asked something practical, I answered only what was necessary. Nothing extra. Nothing emotional. I had become a fixed object she couldn't influence. One evening, she came home with a cardboard box from work. Not big, just awkward enough to notice. She placed it by the door and stood there longer than needed, like she was waiting for me to ask. I didn't. Later, she mentioned restructuring. She said corporate was making changes. She said nothing was official yet, but things were being reviewed. Her voice was careful, like she was trying not to trigger anything. I nodded once and went back to what I was doing. That night, she sat alone at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone. I could see the reflection of the screen in the window. Messages opened and closed without replies. Drafts deleted. Calls started, then canceled before they rang. She finally stood up and walked toward me, stopping a few feet away. She asked if I really meant it, about the 30 days. She asked if there was any flexibility. I told her the date hadn't changed. She didn't push. She just stood there, absorbing the answer. The version of her that used leverage had nowhere to place it anymore. The next day, she left with 2 bags and said she'd be staying with a friend for a bit. She said it like it was temporary, like distance might reset something. I watched her car disappear from the garage camera and went back to work. She came by occasionally after that, to grab clothes, to check mail, to look around like she was taking inventory of a place that no longer belonged to her. Each visit was quieter than the last. She started avoiding eye contact, started moving faster, like staying too long might solidify the outcome. On the 28th day, she stood in the doorway of the second bedroom and looked at me like she wanted to say something final. She didn't. She just nodded, picked up her last bag, and walked out. The door closed behind her without ceremony. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was settled. She came back the night before the deadline expired. I knew it was her before I saw her. The building app logged the garage entry. Same car. Same hesitation at the gate. She parked in a visitor spot instead of the one she used to claim without thinking. I didn't open the door for her. She let herself in with the keys she still had, pausing like she expected it not to work. When it did, she stepped inside slowly, as if the space might react. She looked different. Not dressed up. Not prepared for work or attention. Just tired. The kind of tired that comes from plans unraveling faster than excuses can cover. She stood near the kitchen island, hands resting on the edge like she needed something solid. She said she wanted to talk. She said she needed clarity. She said she didn't understand how things had gone this far without a conversation. I stayed where I was. She said Miami was complicated now. She said promises had shifted. She said leadership had decided to wait. She didn't mention Greg by name, but the absence was louder than any confession. She told me people had started asking questions. At work, in her circle, she said someone had implied she'd miscalculated. She said it wasn't fair how quickly support disappeared. I let her words settle without interrupting them. She moved closer, lowering her voice like proximity might soften boundaries. She said we had history. She said we had built something stable. She said mistakes didn't have to end everything. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her version of events. I just told her the locks would be changed in the morning. The sentence landed clean. No anger. No edge. Her face shifted, not into panic, but into disbelief. Like she'd reached the end of a script and found no alternate ending. She asked where she was supposed to go. I told her that wasn't my decision anymore. She stood there longer than necessary, waiting for something to bend. When it didn't, she nodded slowly, like she was memorizing the moment. She walked through the apartment one last time, touching nothing, looking at rooms like they were exhibits from a past life. She stopped by the bedroom doorway, then turned away. At the door, she hesitated again. She said my name once. Not loud, not desperate, just testing whether it still had weight. It didn't. After she left, I sat in the quiet and waited. No relief, no satisfaction, just completion. The next morning, the locksmith arrived early. By the time the sun cleared the buildings across the street, the old keys were obsolete. I deleted her number, closed the building app, logged out of everything we'd shared. By the time she realized she couldn't get back in, I was already gone. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It came in fragments, carried by distance. I didn't hear from her directly. That part was clean. What reached me instead were echoes. A notification forwarded by accident. A name popping up where it hadn't before. Silence where noise used to be. A week after the locks were changed, Ryan mentioned seeing her car in the garage again. Not parked. Circling. He said she stayed inside. Engine off. Lights dark. He said she left without getting out. At work, things unraveled faster than she expected. The restructuring she'd hinted at hardened into decisions she wasn't part of. Her schedule shifted to less visible hours. Responsibilities narrowed. Titles stayed the same, but influence evaporated. People stopped looping her in. Greg disappeared from her orbit entirely. Not dramatically, not with confrontation, just unavailable. Messages unanswered. Calls redirected. The kind of exit that leaves no surface to push against. What she'd mistaken for leverage turned out to be proximity. And proximity only works while someone benefits from it. I heard she started staying with different friends, rotating couches like temporary permissions. Each move shortened her welcome. People don't like instability when it shows up unannounced. Her family asked questions she couldn't answer cleanly. Why she wasn't living with me anymore. Why things had changed so fast. Why her plans sounded uncertain now. She tried to control the narrative, but it fractured under repetition. I stayed out of all of it. My life contracted instead of expanding. Fewer explanations. Fewer variables. Work stayed consistent. Mornings stayed quiet. The apartment settled into itself like it had been holding its breath. One afternoon, I received a message request from an unknown number. No text, just a missed call that didn't leave a voicemail. I blocked it without listening. Later, a mutual acquaintance mentioned she'd asked about me. Not how I was doing. Whether I was seeing anyone. Whether I'd moved on. Whether I was still in Austin. I didn't respond to that either. What reached me most clearly was the shift in her posture when she crossed paths with people who knew us. Head lower. Smile delayed. Confidence replaced with caution. She wasn't humiliated. She was exposed. Not because anyone called her out. Because the structure she'd relied on was gone. She'd built her future assuming stability behind her. A place to land. A safety net she didn't think she needed until it vanished. By the time she understood what she'd lost, there was nothing to negotiate. I hadn't punished her. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't taken anything back in anger. I'd simply removed myself from the equation. And without that constant, everything else failed to balance. I didn't run into her again. Not in the lobby. Not at the grocery store. Not through mutual friends trying to bridge something that no longer existed. The city stayed large enough to keep distance intact. A month later, I sold the condo. Not out of urgency, not to erase memory. The timing was simply clean. The market was right. The paperwork was easy. I packed what mattered and left the rest behind without ceremony. On my last night there, I stood in the empty living room with the lights off. No music, no noise, just the sound of the building settling into itself. The place didn't feel haunted. It felt neutral again. That was the point. I moved into a smaller place on the other side of town. Fewer windows, more privacy, no shared history baked into the walls. Work followed without disruption. Contracts renewed. New ones came in. My income stayed steady, untouched by the chaos I'd stepped away from. Weeks passed, then months. Occasionally, I'd hear updates indirectly. She hadn't gone to Miami. The promotion never materialized. Greg had transferred regions quietly, like none of it had mattered enough to document. She'd taken a lateral role at a different property, further out, longer commute, less visibility. No scandal, no redemption arc. Just a quieter version of the life she'd tried to leverage into something bigger. Once, a message slipped through before I changed numbers again. No accusation, no apology, just a sentence that tried to sound reflective. Something about not realizing how solid things were until they weren't. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, not because I needed the last word, because the conversation had ended when the structure did. She'd thought control lived in withholding, in timing, in promises traded upward. What she hadn't understood was that stability isn't loud. It doesn't negotiate. It just exists until it's removed. And when it goes, there's nothing dramatic left to fight against. I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't respected. That choice didn't make me harder. It made me precise. Somewhere out there, she's still adjusting, still recalibrating, still explaining a version of events that keeps her intact. I don't correct it. I don't need to. The life I stepped back into doesn't require an audience. It only requires silence, ownership, and the ability to walk away without asking permission.